Hello YouTube. One of Skyrim's most enigmatic and mysterious characters is Durnehviir, the cursed dragon that we find in the Soul Cairn during our adventures in Skyrim's Dawnguard DLC. Today we're talking about him, his backstory, and more importantly, some interesting possibilities of him ever getting rid of his curse and actually leaving the Soul Cairn permanently. So, let's roll the intro and let's get into it. So, Durnehviir, a special case among the dragons that we can meet and fight in our adventures across Skyrim, as this particular dragon has quite the strange look and backstory. To start at the beginning, just like all other dragons, Durnehviir was born at the dawn of time and has existed as a timeless being ever since, just like all other dragons. He was a survivor of the legendary Dragon War, in which the humans who had come from Atmora had risen up against the dragons and the dragon priests who had oppressed them. You see, in ancient Atmoran culture, the Needs from Atmora worshipped the animals as totems of the gods, and with dragons being timeless, nearly divine creatures, to the Needs from Atmora, they were chief among the animals, and thus humanity from Atmora worshipped them most of all. This resulted in a situation where the dragons, through their dragon priests, who were kind of their mouthpiece among human society, ruled over the Needs from Atmora, until at one point, the dragon priests who ruled in the dragon's name started to become ever more oppressive. This oppression and growing cruelty actually resulted in the humans, with the help of the dragon Parthenex who taught them the voice, overthrowing their dragon masters and their dragon priests, killing many of the dragons and their human followers in the process. Durnehviir was one of the dragons who survived this war and landed in the post-war chaos. Because you see, when Alduin was banished, the dragons started fighting among each other for the title of top dog, something which resulted in many remaining followers of the dragons actually leaving them, with the human followers that remained being mostly killed off by the other humans who had rebelled against the dragons. Now, dragons killing dragons, all fighting over scraps, Durnehviir wanted none of that, and instead he isolated himself as he dedicated himself to the study of a frowned upon and forbidden segment of draconic power. Alok-Dilon, or necromancy in the common tongue. He intended to use it to become the most powerful dragon that had ever lived through this forbidden form of magic. For centuries he roamed Tamriel, honing his magic, designing necromantic shouts and becoming more and more powerful. In fact, around this time his name likely wasn't even Durnehviir. Because, you see, dragon names reflect who the dragon is, their essence, which is why speaking Durnehviir's name on Tamriel allows us to summon him from the Soul Cairn. But his name, Durnehviir, means curse never dying. At this time he wasn't yet cursed, so it's very likely that his name was something along the lines of Kodinoxu-like, meaning uses death power, or something along those lines, we don't really know. But his name likely did change as a result of his ultimate curse. And that curse mostly just came about due to his own desire for power, as when he started to discover the limits of his own abilities to learn more and more about the art of necromancy, he was led to a place where almost all necromancers who seek more and more power eventually end up: the Ideal Masters. Now, the Ideal Masters, who are masters of the Soul Cairn, ruler of many souls, yada yada yada, these guys, they are a topic all by themselves, and I covered them 5 years ago. The narration in that video isn't as decent as it is now, but the lore in there is still good, so I recommend watching that video if you want to know more about the Ideal Masters as a topic. I'll put a link to the video in the description. That being said, Durnehviir went to the Ideal Masters looking for more and more power in the art of necromancy. But as they do to all who come to them seeking power, they demand payment. What they ask of you, well, that depends, but the dragon who would become Durnehviir got an offer from the Ideal Masters. They would teach him necromantic powers greater than he could ever imagine. It would make him more powerful than any living dragon. Now, in exchange, all he'd have to do is guard a woman that the Ideal Masters would like to keep imprisoned in the Soul Cairn until she died. Durnehviir agreed, thinking that one mortal lifetime would be worth the price to him if it meant that he would return stronger than ever before. But the Ideal Masters tricked him, as the woman that he was to guard was Valerica, mother of Serana from the Dawnguard DLC, and crucially, a vampire, so immortal. This means that instead of 50 to 70 years, Durnehviir became stuck in the Soul Cairn for centuries upon centuries, as he found himself stuck guarding an immortal vampire in the name of the Ideal Masters. And over the centuries, something very strange started to happen. His immortal dragon soul started to fuse with the soul cairn, a reportedly irreversible process which would make it so that he would not be able to leave the soul cairn ever again, as his soul would be bound to it. And as Dragonborn, when we enter the soul cairn and fight him and kill him, we do not even absorb his soul, rather he disintegrates and then returns again in the soul cairn, indicating that indeed his soul is not ours to take and that he can rightfully be titled the Undead Dragon, as he is undead for all terms and purposes, with his soul likely no longer in his own body, but rather somewhere in the soul cairn. While the Ideal Masters can never fully control his soul, as he has a dragon soul and therefore always a mind of his own, he cannot leave, as the prolonged stay in the soul cairn of centuries has rent his soul partially from his body. While we apparently set him free from his oath by killing him, according to his own words, he cannot return to Tamriel, as going to Tamriel permanently would make it so that, in his words, he would perish after a while. And speaking his name on Tamriel only allows him to return temporarily, and he always returns back to the soul cairn. But the question is, could he ever actually be set free and actually roam Tamriel permanently again, be once again full master of his own soul? I'm not saying it's a good idea to actually try this, as you know, a necromancer dragon doesn't seem like the, best thing to set free, but theoretically, can it be done? Well, there seem to be a few possibilities. First of all, convince the Ideal Masters to let him go. This is the easiest method by far in terms of hoops to go through and outcome. Assuming that the Ideal Masters indeed have full control over the soul cairn, you could try and convince them to let Durnehviir go, returning his soul fully to him to give him the ability to leave permanently. But we know that the Ideal Masters will never do anything for free, so what can you offer them in return for one of their most prized possessions? I don't know, honestly. Perhaps the soul of a Dragonborn, your own soul, that may please them enough, but honestly, I don't know what they would ask, but I know that they would ask a very steep price. So what about ways to free Durnehviir without their involvement? Well, there are a few limited options, but none of them are fully certain to work. One option could be that if he was somehow to escape and then, in his own words, perish on Tamriel, it may actually be that at least part of his soul that is still his actually remains on Tamriel. I've seen some people suggest that it won't simply immediately return to the soul cairn, and if it doesn't, then that means that his body with the part of the soul that remains could be resurrected by Alduin, as he does to other dragons during the game. But considering the soul is a large part of what gives a dragon power, it would likely result in an extremely weak Durnehviir compared to other dragons, as a large part of his soul would be eternally stuck in the soul cairn far away from his body. Perhaps even as he gets freed this way, his name might change, and if his name changes, the part of his soul that still resides in the soul cairn may not even be able to ever return to him, as the resurrected free soul belonging to this new dragon with a new name may no longer be able to properly fuse with Durnehviir's soul fragment still in the soul cairn. So while it's an option, it might not be truly favorable. There are also people who have suggested that Durnehviir has his full soul still in the soul cairn, still in his body, but that killing him there simply makes it so that his soul returns to the Ideal Masters instead of being absorbed by you, and then instead of you absorbing his soul, the Ideal Masters turn him back with his soul. This would mean that killing him on Tamriel may result in a situation where Alduin could resurrect his entire soul and his entire power, but considering the state his body is in, with permanent disintegration, it seems pretty unlikely to me that he has his complete soul with him, but that's just speculation. A second option, which also seems to be unlikely, is to somehow take down the Ideal Masters and take control over the soul cairn, basically making you the one deciding whether or not Durnehviir can have full control over his powers and over his soul. While this sounds attractive, it's a very unlikely option. First of all, the Ideal Masters are enigmatic, and we don't even know whether the thing that I've been showing you on screen is an Ideal Master or not. We just think it is in the community. They are extremely powerful, especially in their own realm, and while there are definitely options, to usurp them, think of mantling, taking their place. I mean, look only at something like what happened at the end of the Shivering Isles DLC of Oblivion. That isn't simple in the slightest, especially not with entities such as the Ideal Masters, who are rumored to have once been mortal and their exact current nature is unknown. So, it's an option. take over the soul cairn, not physically but in a metaphysical way. It's an option again, but not very likely in my opinion, with the first two options being far much more of a realistic option. However, that's basically all I can say about the topic and about Durnehviir and his backstory, and I really hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you did, and if you learned something new about the Elder Scrolls lore today, then maybe consider subscribing to the channel and returning for the next lore video, probably next week. Now, all that remains for me to be done is to thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binna, Gabriel Binna, Polo Asputin, Belly Perithus, Athena Iodis, Dragonborn of Nerevar, Volcure of Argonia, King Chris, Bulge, Scrap of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I hope to see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.